Okay, so there's a new plan on the table to end the war in Gaza. It's emerged from a pretty high-stakes meeting with the U.S. and key Arab leaders, and it looks like there might be a framework for peace. But, this is way more than just another proposal. We're talking about a really complex web of demands, counterdemands, and some serious long-term political chess moves. So with so much on the line and so many people pulling in different directions, the million-dollar question is, can this deal actually work where all the others have failed? Let's dive in and unpack it. All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the new proposal itself. Then we're going to get into the really specific details and, the sticking points. After that, we'll zoom out and look at the bigger political picture it's all tied into. And finally, we'll talk about why this whole thing might just come down to a question of endurance. So where did this all come from? Well, this potential breakthrough happened at a recent meeting where the U.S. brought a new plan to Arab leaders. And, according to reports, there was a surprising amount of agreement. It seems Arab leaders accepted the general framework of the American plan, and in return, the U.S. agreed to some of their key demands. At the very heart of this whole thing is a fundamental trade-off. The U.S. is pushing its plan to stop the war, but to get the Arab leaders on board, they had to make a crucial promise, a guarantee to prevent Israel from annexing the West Bank. And that's not just some minor detail. For them, this is about keeping the very idea of a future Palestinian state alive. So, let's get into the nitty-gritty, because when you do, you see there are basically two competing visions on the table. You've got the U.S. proposal that's focused on ending the fighting, and then you have the Arab leaders' demands, which are all about making sure any peace deal is actually permanent. Okay, so the U.S. plan is a multi-stage process. It kicks off with the full release of all hostages. That's step one. Then, a complete and permanent ceasefire, followed by a gradual withdrawal of the Israeli military. The endgame they're picturing is a Gaza that's governed without Hamas, with international forces keeping the peace and Arab funding to rebuild, all with the Palestinian Authority helping to coordinate things. Now, in response to that, Arab leaders came back with 5 conditions that they say are absolute non-negotiables. Number 1 on the list, preventing the West Bank annexation. But they also want guarantees that Israel won't reoccupy Gaza, a stop to any new settlements, protection for the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and for the Rafah crossing to be opened permanently. And here is where the plans just completely collide. Take the hostage release. The U.S. and Israel want them all out all at once. Hamas is insisting on doing it in phases. What about the ceasefire? The U.S. and Hamas want it to be permanent, but Israel has usually favored temporary pauses. But maybe the biggest gap of all is Hamas's weapons. The U.S. plan doesn't even mention disarmament, which for Israel is an absolute non-starter. Now, it's really important to remember that this ceasefire deal isn't happening in some kind of bubble. Not at all. It's deeply tangled up with 2 other huge conflicts: the future of the West Bank and a diplomatic battle between Israel and Europe that's heating up fast. To really get what's at stake with the West Bank, you kind of have to know about the Oslo Accords. These agreements divided the territory into 3 different zones. Area A was supposed to be under full Palestinian control. Area B was shared control, and Area C was under full Israeli civil and security control. But the reality on the ground today, well, Israel has full civil and security control over Area C. And as you can see, that's over 60% of the entire West Bank. This is exactly why the threat of a formal annexation is such a massive red line for Arab leaders. They'd argue that, in practice, Israel already controls most of it. This quote really just cuts right to the heart of the whole issue. The fear is that a formal annexation isn't just another political move. It would be the final nail in the coffin for the 2-state solution. It would basically erase the physical land needed to ever create a Palestinian state. And if you want to understand Israel's long-term thinking, you gotta hear about this alternative they proposed, the digital tokens plan. Now, Arab leaders rejected this immediately, but the plan suggested offering Palestinians either money or digital tokens to voluntarily leave their land. The idea was these tokens could be swapped for an apartment in a new smart city, all part of a grander vision to build a Riviera of the East. To its critics, this plan looked like a way to displace Palestinians and cement Israeli control for good. And as if all that wasn't complicated enough, a whole other conflict is brewing. Several European nations are moving to formally recognize a Palestinian state, and that has set off a diplomatic firestorm with Israel. We're now seeing a whole series of threats and counter-threats. And this is escalating really quickly. Israel has talked about hitting European diplomats with punitive measures, things like revoking their diplomatic immunity or shutting down cultural centers. But Europe's response could hit even harder. Economic sanctions, maybe even starting with suspending the big EU-Israel free trade agreement. It just goes to show how a diplomatic fight can have very real, very serious economic consequences. So all of this brings us to the final and maybe the most critical question. With so many players and so many conflicting goals, resolving this might not come down to who's strongest militarily or who's the cleverest politician. It might just come down to pure endurance. So let's just recap all these conflicting interests real quick. You've got Israel, who wants to dismantle Hamas and move forward with its long-term Greater Israel plan. Then you have the Arab states, who want to end the war specifically to block that plan. The U.S. is in the middle, trying to keep the region stable and score a diplomatic win. And then there's Hamas, fighting for survival and refusing to disarm. I mean, as you can see, these goals are just fundamentally opposed to each other. One observer watching all of this unfold put it perfectly. The winner here won't necessarily be the strongest side, but the one that has the longer breath, the one with the will to just outlast everybody else. And that really leaves us with the final question to think about. In this incredibly complex and high-stakes battle of wills, which side, Israel, Hamas, the Arab states, or the U.S., truly has the endurance, that longer breath, to see its vision become a reality? The answer to that is going to shape the future of the entire region.